Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you happen to be watching this. I hope you're having a great day. I'm going to be talking about the week one books, Black Hammer, The Other History of the DC Universe, and Poison Ivy. I am not going to be giving you a lot of information about the plot. I am not going to be giving you a lot of information about the characters. What I'm going to be doing is asking you to read and enjoy the confusion that I talked about in the intro video. What I think we're going to try to do here is do what, again, I talked about in the intro video, talk about connections, talk about conflict, talk about things like that, some contrasts, and just set up how these books will tie into other books that we're going to be reading. I'm going to talk with my hands a lot, apparently, and we're just going to kind of dive in as we go. Once again, I have borrowed these images and quoted text for educational purposes. I am not doing this for monetary gain, and I believe that everything I have done it falls within the fair use doctrine. I'm going to repeat the caveats I put in the intro video. We're looking at what comics are doing. A lot of these are recent books. Yes, next week we'll talk about Superman 1 and some of the 10 earliest DC heroes and some of the early Marvel books. But for right now, we are looking at what comics are doing. That will be week one and week three and week four. We'll talk about where they came from in week two. You may be grossed out. I still haven't figured out whether Poison Ivy is guilty of cannibalism or not. You can disagree with the author of the book. You can disagree with the artistic decisions made in the book. You can certainly disagree with all the characters' life choices. Poison Ivy, after all, wants to end the life of all the humans on Earth. That might be something that goes a step too far. There's a change, there's a transformation as we go, but you can certainly disagree with her at the very beginning. And if you think the writer is too liberal or too conservative, or if you think the writer is hammering a political agenda rather than telling a story, you can do that. You get to disagree all you want. There are summary and response assignments that allow you to disagree, but we're going to look at what comics are doing. Plain and simple. I don't think there's any other agenda here. We're just going to look at what they're doing and move on. As I said in that first intro, and I said earlier today, I'm going to try to avoid excessive plot detail. I'm going to ask you to read. If you're confused, enjoy the confusion and read your way out of the confusion. We've got a 5 or 6 issue story arc. At some point, we'll catch up. I believe in each one of these, you should be able to figure out what has happened before. You should be able to figure out what's happened during the book based on everything that the authors give you and based on the art. If you have questions, once again, check with me during office hours, the Zoom office hours, or the in person office hours. And again, one quick reminder I won't be able to do in person office hours this week. One of the reasons I picked these books is that they are comics about comics. Yes, they're comics about characters and being trapped in an alternate dimension on a farm. Yes, they're comics about super villains trying to end the world and suddenly starting to look for retribution and becoming something of a hero, even though she believes the time for heroes is over. And yes, it is another history of a DC universe. It starts in the 1960s instead of 1939. But these are comics about comics as much as they're comics about the characters. And so let's take a look at that for just a little bit. If you take a look at Black Hammer, first of all, the characters are throwbacks to other characters. You've got Abraham Slam, He's kind of got a cape and a cowl like Batman. He's got the oval like Batman has on his chest, but there's that S there that's reminiscent of Superman. Here you see him lifting this huge rock, reminiscent again of Superman. And they are the greatest heroes of a lost age. And the woman who is going to find them, as you see on the screen here, is also bound and determined that they are still alive, that these great heroes are still alive, and that we can somehow go back to an age where everything was heroic. At the same time, Gale in the book says, "We came here and the magic word didn't work anymore." And as I think about the idea of the magic word not working, I begin to wonder if one of the things Jeff Lemire is trying to do is tell us that superhero comics have changed. That people like Alan Moore, whom you'll read about next week or listen to about next week, and other people have moved comics to a point where the magic and the lost age cannot be regained. And perhaps this is a story about the futility of trying to regain a lost age. The other history of the DC universe gives everything with this idea of a point of view. And the point of view is not from Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman. It is from other characters. And it is from characters who were marginalized in the 1930s. It is from people of color. It is from characters who are gay. It is from characters who would not have been part of a comic book superhero community in the 1930s. Also, John Ridley, the person who wrote this, the person who directed the movie 12 Years a Slave, wants these heroes to be a little more gritty than the originals. I can tell you that neither drugs getting dealt on the streets nor Americans getting humiliated overseas seem to get much action. And he's asking about why should we care about nebulous threats stepping out of interdimensional portals. I would argue we should care because it's pretty entertaining, but Ridley is asking us to question the whole concept of superheroes and the conflicts that they're facing versus the day to day conflicts we face at a political level. He's talking about the Iran hostage crisis in this particular quotation, or just day to day dealing with our lives. And I think I've talked in the intro video about the fact that we resonate with superheroes because at some point we are like them. Ridley seems to be casting doubt on them, seems to be deconstructing the superhero just a little bit. And let's see if I can make this work. Poison Ivy. One of the things about Ivy is she says the time for heroes is over. Deconstructing the whole concept of superheroes. Forgetting this idea of justice. Justice is not coming. But we're going to start with retribution. And we're going to deal with this idea that we can get some retribution for all the bad that has happened. We're going to look for assassins. We're going to look for revolutionaries. We're going to defend what's left of the earth. We're not going to get justice. We're not going to get what's due. A total deconstruction for the time for heroes. The magic words might well be over. I believe the art helps make the point that each of these books is making. The art helps develop the point of view each of these books has. If you look at the Black Hammer book, the art is old school. There's 9 panels on this page. A lot of the pages have way more than one panel. There's no big splash. There's a few splash pages, but for the most part, this is a book that has 6 to 9 panels. And if you take a look, there are standard gutters on this page. If you read Slam's speech, it's a standard we're all in this together speech. And we have close ups. Now, there are some things that are a little off. Those trees show, I think, a dead world situation. The sky is orange. The faces do not have full animation. The skin tones are darker and grayer and paler than standard skin tones. All of those things, I think, help tell the story that we're examining comics as comics. But the old school reverence that Lemire seems to have shows up in the art here as well. On the other hand, the other history of the DC universe seems to be doing a lot with black and white. There's white lettering on black background, there's black lettering on white background. You'll notice that a lot of this page is all about shadow. You'll notice a lot of this page is all about body language, that a lot of what we're doing here is away from facial expression and we're viewing it from a distance, just like we're trying to view the history from a distance. There's a lot of non-standard elements, including the justification of the text. You'll notice that this is kind of one panel. It's not really even a panel, it's just kind of art on the page. These are two different ways of dealing with the superhero genre. And Lemire and Black Hammer seem to be doing it in a way that's much more standard than the other history of the DC universe. Meanwhile, Poison Ivy is in some ways a horror book, in some ways a superhero book. It is a book about a woman moving away from being a supervillain to an anti-hero, perhaps. She, at points, is fighting monsters. If you look at the fourth panel down, she is becoming this green, almost monster-like thing as she fights another green monster-like thing. So the gutters are not all the same width. The panels are all at an angle. We are looking at things differently. There's an emphasis on red, Ivy's red hair. There's an emphasis on green because she is part of the green in the DC lore. Her speech bubbles are green. She is human and monster, or human or monster. And yet at the same time, as you read through the book, there's no doubt she's pulling on the classic femme fatale vibes that she's famous for in older books. And so the art, once again, helps tell the story. You'll notice that this one seems a little more cartoony, perhaps, than some of the other ones, but perhaps that's the nature of a genre. And I should have pointed out in the vans earlier, where she's throwing things out, there's a certain connection to the van from Scooby Doo, at least in my mind, dealing with monsters, dealing with horror elements again. Dealing with monsters, dealing with horror elements, referencing Scooby Doo seems like a good segue into some random musings. First of all, I want to talk about the fact that we are going to see this again, sort of. Gale, with a magic word, becoming the superhero. Golden Gale, the alliteration. The sort of is how who ages and who doesn't. And I'll talk about that more next week. But remember the magic word, remember the Golden Gale, remember the alliteration. We're going to come back to all of that next week and talk about it. Also, I came across this And let me see if I can actually do this. Move my face around. Goodness. Sorry for that visual as well. One of the things I think we're going to take a look at here is fashionable jars covering the heads of spacefarers. It was a standard of the 1950s. They're using it here in the Black Hammer book. But the visual on the left from Cosmic Ghost Rider, you'll see that there's a fashionable jar on the head of the Cosmic Ghost Rider, and that's from an issue that came out a couple months ago. Some things just seem to be, excuse me, some things just seem to be motifs that keep going and going and going. And this is one of them. As you're reading, think about things you have seen before. As you're reading, make connections to movies, make connections to books, make connections to other things that you have noticed before. And like I said earlier, just to make a connection to things I've said before, you're going to hear me clear my throat. I'm doing these things in one take. One of the things about DC's other history is that I really do want to point out, as we do the DC's other history, that all of those big events they mentioned happened in the DC continuity. John Stewart did destroy a planet. Crisis on Infinite Earths happened. Supergirl died. The images you see in those books of Superman holding Supergirl and crying happened. There was the death of Superman. Wonder Woman did kill Max Lord. All of those things happened. The difference is that it's about the point of view. How should we view those events? How should we view Batman? Certainly, Batman is viewed far differently by the characters in this book than we are expected to view him. Superman is viewed differently by the Black Lightning character than perhaps some other characters, or than we view him. All of these events are part of DC continuity. If you're not familiar with that, please understand that just because it's another history doesn't mean that these things didn't happen in DC continuity. They did. It's about the point of view that we as readers take by starting it later. It's the point of view Ridley wants us to examine, almost turning everything on its head. Also, I think with Poison Ivy, we do need to look at what's the difference between a superhero and a supervillain. I've mentioned the idea of transformations, and the panels we have on the screen. She undergoes the transformation of thinking that it is better to nurture life than it is to destroy. And she goes on to a new beginning, having the idea of nurturing life, having the idea of not wanting to destroy life. She is sleeping in a garden. She is waking up with a new knowledge. It is almost as if she is in the Garden of Eden and has somehow eaten of the tree of knowledge of good and evil and changed who she is. Those kinds of references, those kinds of connections are things you should always be thinking about. Where have I seen this before? What does this remind me of? What does the author want me to think about? Or think of, excuse me. And to answer the question from the previous slide, hero or villain, I think the critical dimension that distinguishes villain from heroes is good versus evil. And heroes can be egotistical. But unless we perceive them as and the more egotistical we perceive them, the less prepared we are to see them go bad, see them as heroes, the more prepared we are to see them go bad. And again, we will talk about that version of deconstruction as we go through the next 3 weeks. We would point out also that evil is a philosophical and theological subject, we're going to commit philosophy and theology without a license later on as well. And think about the idea of the anti-hero. Perhaps she's not a villain, perhaps she's not a hero, perhaps she's an anti-hero. And she is going to do things wrong, but she doesn't really take delight in doing things wrong. She is selfish and she goes beyond the law. So we need to think about what exactly is poison ivy. And one of your options, I think I mentioned before, is write a definition of a superhero that will fit her. And is she a villain? Is she a hero? Is she an anti hero? It is things that we need to think about. She's selfish. She wants things her way. But does she take joy in the fact that she is killing? Or does she take joy in the fact that she can nurture life, or at least can nurture plant life? Finally, I want to talk about a that was then, this is now. The idea of Black Hammer, the idea of Black Lightning, the idea of that costume with the deep V neck and the afro, and all of those things that are part of the 1970s. This is squarely in the mode of the 1970s. We had films like Coffee, and we have the idea of Pam Grier and her outfit. And I don't even know who the actor beside her is, but his outfit. And the idea of blaxploitation films. Black Lightning, the original Power Man, Luke Cage, all of those characters were part of that blaxploitation period. Excuse me. And so when you take a look at it, I think it's important to understand that they were part of their time. Just like Black Hammer is trying to get us to think about that more innocent time, Black Lightning, as Ridley is showing him to us, is part of that blaxploitation time. And finally, just because it made me feel old, Jim Brown, perhaps the greatest running back of all time, was an actor and an activist. He passed away last month, and he too was part of the blaxploitation era, the movie Slaughter. And I think it's just important to understand as we go through this that comic books are part of the era in which the authors created them. And so the original Black Lightning that Ridley is revising was part of that 60s and 70s era. Poison Ivy, written right now, is part of the 21st century era. And I think we have to really look at, are they accurately reflecting the times in which we live? Can we make connections to those times as well? Once again, I'll apologize right now for A, my face being on screen again, B, the throat clearing incident. I'll try to do better next time. I'll remind you I'm not a professional YouTuber. I'm doing the best I can here. I hope everyone has a good week. And let me make sure that's nothing else. Oh, I'm sorry. Please remember that you're going to have comments that you need to make, and make them in this video. The comments will be open. Make them in this video. You can talk about the books, which ones you like best, which ones you didn't. If you're stuck, here's some other things to consider. Here's some questions to consider. And please remember, you need to make a comment. You need to comment on one other student's comments, and I'll be going through and responding to you. As I said in the intro video, and as I said, I think in one other spot, other classes will have a discussion board. We're just going to use the YouTube videos every week as our discussion board. All right, now I'm pretty sure that I'm finished, I hope. As I said, I'm not a professional. I apologize for the glitches in this one. I'll endeavor to do better next time. Hope everybody has a good week.